Hi, this is Alan Gassman. I am here with Alison Freeman and James Constable, and we're going to talk about the hurricane aftermath. We are in Pinellas County, Florida, and the beaches in Pinellas County, Florida got hit pretty hard. Waterfront property in the St. Pete area got hit pretty hard. There were some real horror stories. There were lives lost in horrific situations. A big lesson was when they tell you to get out, get out. People drowned, bodies washed up on people's backyards on the beach who didn't get out in time. People got in elevators and ended up in waist deep water. So we've got to be very careful. The second thing, not so bad as the loss of life and the loss of so many valuable family items. People lost all their furniture, all their pictures of their children, all their movies, everything they had. But the next part is the financial devastation. Now, admittedly, most of the people who live in the beaches and on the water hopefully can afford some devastation. And there's insurance and there's federal programs that we're going to talk about. There's tax deductions, but the purpose of this presentation with these renowned experts is to talk about how to protect your rights with respect to the situation you have. The hand you're holding of cards and what to do with that hand. Do you wait for the insurance inspector to finally get there? Do you believe the insurance inspector when they tell you to use their own contractor? Can you rely upon a contractor right now to actually get their work done, given how busy they are? Do you hire a public adjuster and give them 10% of your recovery before you even know what the insurance company is going to offer you? Do you hire a lawyer? Do you hire a forensic engineer to look at your situation to document it before anyone starts messing with the structure? These are all the questions that clients are asking us and that people in Pinellas County, Florida, some in Pasco, Manatee County, North Carolina, this is what people are facing. Now, Saturday at 11, my partners and some law students and I are going to talk about the tax implications and the property tax implications and a little bit about FEMA and the Small Business Administration. And Allison and James are going to tell us what they know about those things today. But I think I've said enough, and it's time to turn this over to the experts. We have some PowerPoint slides that I'll be glad to show, but then maybe we should just turn the PowerPoint off and be three large talking heads and discuss, what to do. I do want to say that on one hand, we don't want you to panic, because for a lot of you and for your clients, the insurance carrier will come through. FEMA will help. The SBA will help. But you want to make sure that you don't do anything that will sacrifice your position. And the question is, should I hire a lawyer? Well, none of us would ever say not to hire a lawyer, because if you don't have a lawyer, something bad may happen. So, if you're a client of mine or a friend of mine or a colleague of mine, then I would just say, be careful on how you proceed. So now I'll do what I promised to do 3 minutes ago. I'll be quiet and I'll turn this over to you guys, the real experts.
All right. Well, first of all, Alan, I want to thank you for having us on this morning. And, our sympathies go out to, all of our neighbors and folks in our communities. I live on the Intercoastal out by Clearwater Beach. So I'm looking up and down the street, seeing, my neighbors' belongings out at the curb and, homes flooded out and folks displaced, and our hearts go out, for sure. And we're living in it, firsthand, in our community. And so we're certainly sympathetic to that. I hope that this Zoom presentation this morning can help some folks out. I know that since the storm hit, my cell phone's, been going nuts, and our office line's been going nuts. And hopefully having a forum like this where we can get groups of people together, we can kind of help distribute or disseminate information, because we really do want to try to help spread as much information as we can, because this is a unique situation. We had a flood event followed by a hurricane event. A lot of folks are dealing with insurance claims for maybe the first time, haven't been through this. FEMA's convoluted in terms of what's covered and what's not, and of course, so is homeowners insurance or insurance on some of these commercial buildings. So hopefully we'll be able to work through some of those issues and help provide some answers to some of the frequently asked questions that I know Allison and I have been fielding, and I'm sure you have as well. By way of just brief background, again, James Constable, I'm an attorney. For the first 5 years of my legal career, I represented insurance companies, and dealing with insurance companies, our practice was dedicated to handling property insurance claims, all catastrophe-related losses. So we handled a lot of hurricane claims, flood claims, and other catastrophes such as fires or sinkholes. And I did that for 5 years. And then in 2012, I switched sides and dedicated my practice to helping policyholders with property insurance claims. So 100% of my practice, literally since I was a law clerk in law school, has always been handling property insurance claims. And the vast majority of those claims have been hurricane and flood related. So we've got quite a bit of experience and background in dealing with those cases. My law partner, Allison, go ahead and introduce yourself, who has a very similar background.
Yeah, I'm Alison Freeman. James and I actually met working in defense work. I think our offices were next to each other maybe, but we were always those first people in early in the morning so that we could get started on stuff. So I think we have always kind of worked very similarly. And then, yeah, so both the defense work, I stayed with that defense work for a while, and then met up with James and mentioned that I, was having a hard time doing that work and kind of wanted to see what it was like to represent homeowners and business owners and condo association owners. And that's when I switched sides, and I've, ever since, I feel like the work that I get to do is so rewarding to help people. I mean, these are awful situations. I know I'm in Hillsborough, and even Hillsborough has had so much devastation. And I, James and I both have been out there. We've been, putting on, I was helping people cut out drywall and rip up carpets, and just I guess we've been doing this for so long, and I've seen it in so many areas, Fort Myers and all, and having it just your friends and your family and your neighbors like right with you for the first time, and in such unprecedented, I've never seen so much devastation and so widespread like this, has been kind of eye-opening, I think, even with all the experience we have in this area. And I think James feels the same. I feel like we've seen it firsthand before, but this has just been the magnitude and the amount of people impacted has just been unlike any other in quite some time. So being able to help people and do this work now on this side with the experience that we have on the defense side has been, it's rewarding, and we're able to kind of look at it from both sides, given what we know from the defense side. So I think that's a unique perspective we can bring to the table.
So, one of the, kind of threshold issues I want to make sure is that, because we first had Helene, which was primarily a flood event, especially in Pinellas County, but really up and down the west coast of Florida. And then, of course, Milton a couple of weeks later, which was primarily a wind event. We had significant triple-digit winds along the coast. Is understanding the difference between flood insurance and building insurance or wind insurance. So, kind of threshold issue is, what does flood insurance mean? And what is my building or wind insurance? When does that kick in? And so flood is rising water. I think of flood damage as flood that comes from the bottom up, whether a parking lot got flooded out and the water backed into the building due to that backup in the parking lot or in a retention area, or if we've got a property on the coast and storm surge came into the building. Flood is the water that impacts the building from the ground up, storm surge or inundation of water from the bottom. And of course, these policies that provide coverage when there's flood primarily are under the National Flood Insurance Program. So we do have a private market for flood insurance, but it's a very limited market, particularly in the state of Florida along the West Coast. So the overwhelming majority of these flood policies that we're dealing with are under the National Flood Insurance Program, okay? And the National Flood Insurance Program is under the umbrella of FEMA. So when we hear of FEMA, we've got kind of two things. Under FEMA, we have the National Flood Insurance Program, but also under FEMA, we have different aids, aid packages and grants, et cetera. So, but under the National Flood Insurance Program, typically for residential, we're seeing limits of $250,000. Typically for commercial, we're seeing limits of $500,000 for the building. And then if it's a condo policy, higher limits based on the number of units in that building. Lower deductibles, but also limited coverage. These policies are not intended to restore the policy holder to pre-loss condition. Okay, there are benefits there, but there are also clear exclusions. And then there are some areas that kind of fall in the gray under these FEMA insurance policies. So, you know, a lot of where the west coast of Florida is going to have flood claims. Now from Hurricane Milton, we had these triple-digit winds, and that's where a lot of times we look at our building insurance, whether it's a homeowner's insurance policy or it's a property policy for a commercial building, whether it's a hotel or a condominium association. Well, we're looking for our wind-created openings in the building that allow water to come in. And we're typically seeing that in the form of roof leaks because there's damage to the roof caused by wind. Maybe the windows were compromised as a result of the wind. Railings and balconies can be damaged by wind and then create openings for water to come in. So you can kind of think of the wind coverage or the building coverage as water that comes into the building from the top down or from openings in the building, which were caused by wind. But importantly, these building policies have a blanket exclusion for flood. Okay, so your building policy that includes wind or hurricane coverage is going to exclude all that rising water. So what we're seeing, you know, really are instances where there's been 2 or maybe 3 claims reported, because under Helene, we had a flood claim reported under the flood policy. We had a wind claim reported under the building's hurricane endorsement. And then now under Milton, I've got more wind damage. So now I'm looking at a 3rd claim for Hurricane Milton. And one of the nuances there is then looking at the deductibles, right? Some wind policies have a hurricane deductible that applies per occurrence, which means the first hurricane has a deductible applying as a subtraction. And then the second hurricane is another subtraction, which might play into the decision of whether to report a claim or not. And then some are on a calendar year basis where we've got to look at that hurricane deductible endorsement and see what the policy says, because the vast majority of these policies say it's a calendar year deductible, in which case that second hurricane doesn't create a second opportunity for a deductible. But I think it's important to understand, you know, kind of as a threshold issue, where the merriment of those 2 policies is and where the disconnect is. Because in reality, what we see a lot of is the flood insurance pointing to the wind carrier and the wind carrier pointing to the flood carrier in terms of trying to negate certain coverages under their respective policies.
But I think some people have reached out and then they're trying to make that determinations for themselves, right? They look around and they can see a flood line very distinctly on their house. And then they may say, well, I don't think I have a wind claim, or, you know, trying to decipher that. And I think, you know, based on what James is saying, you know, you're looking for that stuff above and below, but at the end of the day, it's best to be calling those claims in if you have the damages, at least I think. And we've been telling people that at least, so that way you're not losing out on a claim that should have been filed timely. So we want people to, you know, make sure that they're filing those claims with their carriers.
Yeah, and you know, kind of just to follow that up, the legislator changed the statute of limitations and requirements to report a claim. So, you know, as it relates to these storms, there's a deadline of 12 months or 1 year from when the storm made landfall to put the insurance company on notice of a loss. And so it's important to get these inspections done in a timely manner. And what I would also add to that is that even though the legislator says the statute of limitations is 12 months, these insurance policies, all in the conditions section, have a duty to promptly provide notice of a loss. And prompt is not defined in the policy. And there are many insurance carriers that have taken the position that reporting a claim even 60 or 90 or 120 days after the loss is a failure to provide prompt notice. And so just because the legislator has given policyholders 12 months, understand that's a statute of limitations. That is not necessarily definitive on what is prompt notice. So, you know, you want to provide notice to the carrier as early as possible. And then kind of a related note on that, what we tend to see is, you know, of course, in some of our cases that end up being litigated is, you know, initially I didn't think the wind damages were that big of a deal, so I didn't report the claim. Maybe I was concerned about the amount of the deductible, exceeding the loss. And so I made temporary repairs, or I made repairs. But then as time goes on, we get into rainy season, we see more and more damage. It becomes apparent that 1 or 2 repairs wasn't sufficient, that actually the roof does require replacement, or the windows do need to be addressed. And the risk you run is getting too far down the line, too far away from the proximity of the storm. And now we're running into a late notice coverage defense, which is a viable defense, in certain circumstances. So, if there's any question as to whether or not to report a claim, our encouragement is if there's damage, the policy requires to be provided, the notice of the damage be provided to the carrier. There are certainly business decisions to be made there in terms of, well, what about underwriting, and what about, loss runs, and how's this going to affect my premiums moving forward? But we just experienced catastrophic storms, right? I mean, these are 100-year storms, flooding like we've never seen in Pinellas County, triple-digit winds along the beach. This is the time to put your carrier on notice. And the reality is these underwriting problems are going to exist next year, whether you individually report a claim or not, because of, countywide and statewide insurance issues that we're dealing with. And the other thing spins into, the remediation is we've got these buildings and they're wet, right? They were either inundated with flood water, they've got, rainwater coming from the roof, or maybe it's a combination of both. By now, the majority of properties that I'm seeing, remediation contractor has been brought in. And there's a couple of really important things that kind of go in line with the duties of the policyholder to provide prompt notice, is also to give an opportunity to make damaged property available for inspection. And that's where you just, want to make sure that there's great documentation in the form of photographs, videos, cataloging contents with, photos. And as Ali always points out, take pictures of the serial numbers, take pictures of the model numbers, because we're seeing this debris all stacked up on the side of the road. And it's really hard to go back in time and try to, determine, well, what exact fridge did you have in there? What exact kind of equipment did you have in there? A quick picture of a serial number and a model number can go a long way when trying to prove up your contents inventory form. And so, it's important to document everything, and then make sure that those photos, make sure that those records are being backed up somewhere, so that when your iPhone ends up, getting dropped and broken, it doesn't just disappear. It's important to back that documentation up, because whether it's flood or it's wind, there's always going to be follow-up questions from the carrier looking for additional documentation. And what we find in our practice is the more we can do to document a loss, the more we can do to help the insurance adjuster prove what happened, prove what was in there before the loss, prove what was damaged, the easier it is for us to negotiate these settlements with the, with these different insurance companies. And the same goes for remediation. When, by no means do I think folks should be waiting until an adjuster comes out to start getting wet stuff out of their homes, or to get wet stuff out of their businesses. It's got to get out. It's salt water. And if it's been sitting in there for 3.5 weeks, it's going to have mold all over it. And there's big limits, or small limits, giant limitations for mold. So we're getting this wet stuff out, but we want to be able to document and prove that it was wet before the demolition work's done, so that you can prove up your case.
Yeah, and along that, I mean, if you ever think it's too much, it's probably not enough, actually, is what I tell people about documentation. Like people, they're like, I have 100 photos. Okay, great, that's perfect. 100 photos sounds wonderful. And then the other thing is, yeah, people don't realize also, sometimes I think there's confusion about when they delete it from their iPhone, it's still on the cloud or whatever. And we've had so many people then find it's not where they thought that it was backed up. So I told them, like, pull an Amazon Photos or a Google Drive or whatever, and just make sure it's there, because you'd be surprised, based on your cell phone carrier, whoever you have, that sometimes it doesn't back up the way you think it did. And it's awful when that's learned the hard way, when they try to, they're like, I took all these photographs, I have this wonderful video, it's here, it's there, and then they can't pull it. It's amazing how much that happens. I guess you just don't know what the cloud is, or what it backs up and for how long. And so that's been a really hard thing for people when they're, trying to pull that stuff already, even with 3 weeks out, trying to find some of that stuff and recreate it has been really difficult. So, yeah, when James is saying document, it's very, very important to do all that. And along the same lines, when we're trying to deal with this remediation stuff, and you're starting to pull that stuff out, we know that already there are companies going out knocking on doors that are not proper companies. So when these people come to you, try to offer help, it's wonderful to be offered help always, but just be very careful about who you're, accepting that help from. We've seen lots of scamming happening. I think I've seen it firsthand actually while I've been at people's properties, which isn't, they've walked right in and said, hey, I can help you do this and that. I know tree debris in my neighborhood, for example, an individual went around and said, hey, I can cut down all your trees and take all the debris away. They paid him up front. We never saw the man again. So just be very, very careful who you utilize for this stuff, especially because that's going to help for documentation also to prove what's been spent, especially if you're paying out of pocket for any of that stuff, to be able to say, hey, I paid so-and-so. If you're telling them I paid a guy in a truck from I don't know where, his name was Mike. I mean, that stuff is very hard to prove up later. So just be very careful who you're working with and smart. And you can look up anyone's licenses online, make sure that they've got the proper licensure to be doing what they're doing. So we always say, I know people want to get help and want to get things started, but just be very careful about who you use.
Yeah, and even though a contractor might be offering a discount for paying in cash, you'll never be able to prove that you paid that cash to the contractor. So, my encouragement is write a check, use a credit card, have some sort of proof of payment that you're going to be able to provide, because you might get a signed invoice that says paid in cash. But, Allie and I, we were on the defense side. We used to investigate fraud. And, one of the things that always raises a red flag is when something's paid in cash, because there's no paper trail. So my encouragement, use a check, use a credit card, have payment. There's plenty of payment options available where you can prove that you made that payment and demonstrate, make the insurance company's job easier to be able to prove up what damages you've incurred. And so, kind of chronologically, we're talking about, okay, well, is this damage under a flood policy, or this is under a wind policy, or is it both? Oftentimes right now, what we're seeing is it's both. Chronologically, timely notice to an insurance company, documenting the loss, right? Good photos, good documentation, saving our receipts, saving our invoices. Then we're drying the place out, right? We've got remediation contractors in there, remove the wet drywall, remove the wet flooring, and then, get some fans, get some dehumidifiers going, which is all being done. Save all those invoices. And then the question's kind of now what, right? And we're kind of at that period right now. It's been a few weeks. Most buildings have been dried out or the tail end of dry out. And now the question is, where do we go from here? Okay, and so this is kind of a challenging time because you've contacted the insurance company, hopefully. If not, let's have the discussion. But now the building's dried out and you want to put it back together because, if it's a, restaurant, we want to be back open for business. If it's a condominium association, we want to restore the building. We want to get folks back into their homes. And of course, homeowners want to be back in their houses. But, we've got an obligation to provide notice of the loss. And, what I've been suggesting, as long as the carriers are getting out in a timely manner, and, that's all relative. But once we've got it dried out and we've got it in that, kind of quasi-demolished state, I'd like to have the insurance adjuster out. I'd like to give the insurance company an opportunity to come out and do an inspection. And that means your flood adjuster and your wind adjuster. So we've got some properties that are dried out and kind of waiting on these inspections. And the field adjuster gets to come out and see what kind of shape it's in before you put it back together. And I think that's important. I think that that's a reasonable opportunity to allow these insurance companies to come out and do these inspections. If you go put a new roof on because your roof was all torn apart before the adjuster gets out and gets to take photos, you might have photos and they might not think it's enough. They might have wanted to hire an engineer to go inspect your roof. And that repairing those damages before they have those opportunities can also be a pitfall or a place where you're in violation of the duties after loss to provide opportunity for inspection. So where I think photos are sufficient when it comes to making the argument that, look, this place was wet and I had to get it dried out, I seriously question whether it's reasonable to go replacing the roof, to go replacing the windows, to go, reinstalling flooring and drywall and baseboard before the insurance companies had an opportunity to do their inspection. So what I'm encouraging folks to do is let the carriers come out, let them do their inspections. Hopefully the adjuster comes out, takes photos, documents it, writes up a report calling for, the necessary repairs. And then at that point, once the inspection's done, once the opportunity to see the damaged property has been done, then you can go through, work with your contractor on restoration, reconstruction, et cetera. But I really think it's important to allow these inspections to go forward prior to making repairs, even if that means these properties are sitting idle for a period of, a couple of days, a couple of weeks, hopefully not a couple of months. And in a tough pill to swallow is that our legislator, gives insurance companies 90 days. This is part of, some insurance, we'll call them reforms over the last year or two, that insurance companies have 90 days to render a coverage position from the time of the reporting. So if you called in your claim 3 weeks ago, your insurance company still has 70 something days before they're required to render a coverage position. Now, I'd like to think a lot of carriers are going to act faster than that. I'd like to think that a lot of carriers are going to be issuing coverage determinations in a more timely manner, but statutorily, they've got a 3-month window before they've even got to render a coverage position. And that's going to leave a lot of folks in limbo as it relates to the reconstruction and repairs. Do I start paying out of pocket to make these repairs now, or am I waiting 90 days to make some of those decisions? So I think now is the time to, be talking to contractors, getting those reconstruction estimates, vetting these vendors, and trying to come up with, an answer to the question of what is it going to cost to put my house back together or put my building back together.
And when they come out, I was gonna say, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
That's
Sorry.
right. How long is the average? How long are people waiting before an adjuster comes out on average? Can you tell us, if it's been 10 days, is that bad and you should start calling and hollering at them, or what are people experiencing right now?
I would say a week to 10 days has probably been average. I would say that the majority of the claims that we've reported, we've had a field adjuster from the insurance company out. We've got a lot of clients that, we work with property managers, we work with condominium associations, and they were having us, inspect their properties. Our vendors inspect their properties immediately after the storm, determine if there's damage, then look at the policy. Does the damage warrant a claim? So we were calling in claims, a day or two after the storm. And the majority of those properties have already been inspected. Now, checks haven't been coming in, but at least the adjusters have been out. They've done the inspections. I think a week to 10 days is a reasonable time period. I think anything more than a week to 10 days is an awfully long time for an insurance company to get out to go look at it, to go look at a loss, especially when that adjuster inspection is kind of slowing down the repair process.
Yeah. And who are these adjusters? Are they skilled engineers? Are they corporate people? Are they independently hired? Are they federal agents? Who are these people?
So they're the field adjusters. Yeah, so they're sending them out. We've noticed they're coming from all over right now because, like we've talked about several times, the devastation is so large on this that a lot of them are coming in from other states to help. And I think part of the frustration for many people, like when you've been waiting a week, 10 days to get that adjuster to your property, you want to take it out on that person just because you're frustrated, right? Like you've been sitting there, but that's actually not your person to take it out on. That like you want them to see it all. You want to provide them access, show them the interior, the exterior, let them look at all the damages, document all the damages. As frustrated as you may be with the process, like they're not your friend, but they're also not your enemy. They're just the adjuster there to do a job. And it's amazing to me sometimes. I don't know if people watch the 60 Minutes that was out about insurance adjusters, but a lot of times those field adjusters had written, for all the damages that they saw and something occurred later that they had nothing to do with. So that was my big point. I tell people, I'm like, look, when this field adjuster comes out, let them document, show them around, tell them, what's been happening. You kind of want to start that dialogue with them. Because this is a process of you trying to help the insurance company do their job while you're also trying to get your claim, properly adjusted and worked on. And so really it doesn't do you any good to, withhold anything from them or keep them from seeing anything or, taking it out on them. It's just going to make them want to get out of your house a lot quicker. So just kind of, you just let them do their job. But yeah, that's usually who's sent first. And then they may end up hiring an engineer or someone after that who will come out with additional, background and information.
Is it the same type of people for the flood that's federal as it is for the wind? And are they going to be easier to deal with for the flood because it's the federal government's money as opposed to the insurance company's money, or how is that working?
I think it's really case by case. I think, like anything, there's good adjusters, there's bad adjusters, right? There's, insurance companies typically are using third-party adjusting companies to inspect, especially when a catastrophe like this occurs, okay? They don't have staff to get out there and service their customers, so they hire folks from out of state. So you got a flock of independent adjusters from out of state, from in-state, from all over the place with varying degrees of qualification, okay? Some of them show up to the house and they're super prepared. They walk the roof, they go thoroughly through the property, they spend an hour, hour and a half documenting, explaining coverage positions, explaining how these things work, doing a really, really great, thorough job. There's some amazing independent adjusters out there with great backgrounds. And I've also seen the exact opposite. I've seen, field adjusters show up in a car, they don't even have a ladder, they have no way of getting on the roof. The guy doesn't even have a tape measure, he's there to measure and scope a loss, and it's just an abomination. And they're completely ill prepared. And, they've got, 8 or 10 inspections to knock out before the end of the day because they're getting paid a flat rate per inspection. So, it's like anything, there's a very wide spectrum of good adjusters and bad adjusters, just like, frankly, there's some insurance companies that do a really good job and there's some insurance companies that do a really bad job. And one thing that Allie politely just kind of glossed over as it relates to field adjusters was the 60 Minutes. Okay, I think the day before Hurricane Helene hit, 60 Minutes aired an episode, and if you haven't seen it, go to Google and type in 60 Minutes insurance Florida and pull it up. It's a 13-minute watch. And what it talked about, it was aired nationally, are these field adjusters. And they go out and they're hired to go scope the loss for the insurance company. And they go out and they write an estimate and they take photos and they write a report to the insurance company. And in many, many, many instances, they're writing a report with an estimate that has 6-figure repairs, significant damages, et cetera. And they're sending that to the insurance company. Now, the insurance company never goes out to the property. They're relying on this third party, but you've got a desk adjuster internally at the insurance company that's just striking through these estimates and then sending it to the homeowner with the field adjuster's name on it, but with a totally different number. And there are instances where there's a 6-figure estimate, okay, and it's prepared by this, field adjuster, but when the homeowner gets the letter, they've got a letter that says the loss is below the deductible or the loss is only $10,000 or $15,000, and attached is the accompanying estimate, and it's the guy that came out and that they talked to. And this is happening industry-wide. It's not with every insurance company. It's not with every desk adjuster, every field adjuster, but it is happening across the state. And so if you haven't seen that video, watch it. It's 13 minutes on 60 Minutes, and it's very informative, and it sheds light on, the problem with answering your question is some of these folks are super educated, some of these folks are super genuine, and some of them just aren't, and they're in a hurry and they're trying to do as many inspections as they can before they, move on to the next one. And unfortunately, these estimates, these evaluations that are done in the field is the crux of what's paid or not paid on these claims, okay? Because, most of these insurance companies are not getting a second opinion from a different adjuster. A lot of times there's not an engineer going out, or if it is, it's an engineer that's hired by the same insurance company over and over again. And so it's not truly a third party looking at it. It's, it's being looked at in a vacuum. And what we find is that these adjusters, again, not all, you can't generalize and say all adjusters are bad or all insurance companies are bad. They're not, but there's not enough checks and balances. And so when you've got an adjuster that tends to be conservative or tends to call balls and strikes in favor of the insurance company when it's a close call, that can result in some really significant differences in what's paid on these claims versus what's not paid on these claims. And, that's where we, frankly, find a lot of opportunities to advocate for our clients, because we're sending out an adjuster, we're sending out an engineer, whether it's before the insurance company's claim determination or afterwards, to give us a perspective, and typically a more liberal perspective in terms of coverage. And the law in Florida is if there's a question as to whether something's covered or not, if it's ambiguous or it's in the gray area, the case law defines it as ambiguity. If there's an ambiguity in coverage, it should be resolved in favor of the policyholder. In other words, the tie goes to the homeowner. The tie goes to the person that is the non-drafting party to the insurance contract. And so we've got these adjusters that are generally trained to look at these exclusions that generally are coming up with a conservative evaluation of the damages, when the law in Florida says that ambiguities are resolved in favor of coverage. If there's a question of whether it's covered or not, it should be covered. That's been consistent Florida case law for decades, and it's just basic contract principles. And so there's usually quite a bit of opportunity for advocacy to help build on these claims and make sure that policyholders are getting paid, not unjustly enriched, not getting damages that they're not entitled to, but getting the full amount of damages that they are entitled to, whether that's under a FEMA policy for flood damage or that's under a building policy or hurricane policy for wind damage.
So somebody who hasn't hired a lawyer and hopes not to, they would be wise to hire a contractor or a forensic engineer to come and look at their situation to
at times, and
what they need.
That can be kind of challenging, right? Because what we've seen with insurance claims and contractors, and we need contractors, right? The contractors are the ones that are drying these places out, and the contractors are the ones that are putting them back together. So we need the contractors. We can't fix our homes and get back to life as normal without the contractors. One of the challenges is weighing the rights of the policyholder that paid the premium, that owns the house, versus the benefits to the contractor. And that's where we've seen, like, assignment of benefits has been a big topic in these cases, right? Because there's contractors that'll say, hey, look, if you sign this document, whether it's an assignment of benefits or a direction to pay or work authorization, sign this document, I'll deal directly with your insurance company. You don't have to do anything, which sounds great, in theory, but in practice, there's an assignment there of insurance benefits to that contractor. And so if that policyholder later decides, I don't want to use this contractor or this vendor, or decides, determines that they can get the repairs done for a less expensive amount of money, or has some sort of an issue, if there's been a direction to pay or a work authorization or assignment of benefits, there might be challenges to getting out of that. And so now I've got checks coming from my insurance company that are payable to this contractor that I'm not even using anymore. And that's really been abused over the years, and the legislator keeps trying to find ways to deal with this because it's a problem. So look, there's a lot of great contractors out there that we're all going to have to rely on to fix our houses. But there's certainly some challenges to relying on the contractor to be the advocate. We've also got, because of the legislation in Florida, contractors prohibited from adjusting a claim or negotiating a claim. So we've got lawyers who can negotiate and advocate. We've got this class called public adjusters. There are private adjusters that are allowed to negotiate or advocate. And then you've got contractors that are specifically precluded from negotiating or advocating, which was one of the legislators' responses to trying to deal with this. So I'd really caution against having a contractor advocating, because number one, it's illegal. And number two, if you put the contractor in control contractually, that might be something that you live to regret. Maybe that's a great contractor for dry out, but they might not be the one that I want putting my kitchen back together. Usually the demo guys, not usually, but sometimes the demo guys aren't necessarily the fine finish, companies that you want putting it back together. And so there can be some disconnects there as well.
Do you want to tell us more about the public adjuster? Because I think people completely confuse the fact that the insurance company sends an adjuster, and then there's somebody who shows up at your doorstep and says, oh, I'll be your advocate. I'm a public adjuster.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So, and there is a difference. So, in the state of Florida, you get an insurance license, and when you get that license after taking the prep class, you either dedicate your license to being an independent adjuster for insurance companies, or being a public adjuster, private adjuster, where you work for policyholders. You can't be both, okay? So you either got a 620 or a 320 are the two different licenses. And so you're one or the other. Either you're working for the insurance company or you're working for the homeowner. Private adjusters or public adjusters have completed a test administered through the State Department of Financial Services, and have some continuing education requirements, and are able to adjust and negotiate claims with insurance companies whereas a contractor cannot, okay? And so public adjusters can be really helpful in terms of being an advocate for a homeowner or a policyholder because, you know, hopefully they understand the coverage issues and are you know, getting a comparable estimate or comparison estimate, something to the alternative of what the field adjuster for the insurance company is doing. And in our law firm, you know, when we handle cases pre-suit, we're effectively acting as a private adjuster or public adjuster, right? So we're, you know, reporting a claim, getting a comparative estimate. If we need an engineer, hiring an engineer to come in and evaluate the damages and make determinations regarding causation, and then negotiating with the insurance company. I guess what's a little bit different about our practice is we act like public adjusters or private adjusters on the front end. And the difference is if we need to file a lawsuit on a case because we reach an impasse with settlement negotiations, then of course we're filing a lawsuit and litigating those cases, and we litigate them frequently. You know, the distinction there is, of course, a public adjuster, they're going to reach a point where there's an impasse, or if they reach a point where there's an impasse in the settlement negotiations, then they're going to refer that case or bring that case to a law firm such as mine. Or, you know, there's others in the area that do what we do.
Okay.
And during this time, just so you know, if you decide to go with a public adjuster because there was a state of emergency, the most they can charge you is 10% of the claim. And how that works is that, you know, whatever amount the insurance company, you know, they work the claim, they help you with the process. Like James was saying, they negotiate, they advocate for you, and then whatever payment is made, then they get 10% of that total amount paid to you.
Do they enjoy the attorney-client privilege? If they order a report or something? No. So if you could find a lawyer to do it for the same price, you'd have the attorney-client privilege. So if the engineering report you order has something in it you don't really want the insurance company to see, you can keep it under the privilege.
Yeah, there's no work product privilege and no attorney-client privilege. So, and we see it in litigation, you know, the public adjuster's complete file is always turned over to the insurance company, you know, in response to a subpoena. You know, there's rarely a good faith basis for objecting to that in litigation.
Okay. So what's next on the agenda?
Well, I guess, you know, maybe thinking about just some other frequently asked questions, and we're kind of chronologically at the point where we've led up to, okay, well, where do I go next? You know, are we going to engage an advocate, or are we going to go it alone? There needs to be advocacy, okay? If it's a policyholder advocating for themselves because they become educated, you know, they're learning from a seminar like this, doing research online, really understanding what's in the policy, and if you're a quick study and able to advocate for yourself, great. If not, you need an advocate. Be your own advocate or a fire, but you know, just relying on what the insurance company says, I find to be problematic. And I think there's just too many gray areas when it comes time to coverage and reconstruction and what's a reasonable cost. You know, come on, reasonable just sets the stage for there's more than one way to look at it. And so you need an advocate. And by the way, our law firm's charging the same 10% as public adjusters are. But you know, from there, now when we get to reconstruction, we've got the FEMA 50% rule, and it's such a hot topic right now. And Alan, I know you'll be dealing with that some in the next webinar in terms of you know, some of the ramifications of FEMA. But you know, we've got the Florida Building Code, which generally says that if the cost of repairs or renovations to a structure exceeds 50% of the value of that structure, not including the value of the land, then that structure has to be brought up to current code. Okay. And when we're looking at the properties most affected by this storm, the value of the land is significant, right? Beachfront, waterfront, oceanfront, Pinellas County, west coast of Florida property. So the value of the property itself is high, but the value of the structures is sometimes a smaller part of the overall value. Okay. And so we've got, you know, for, you know, example in Pinellas County, you can go to the Pinellas County Property Appraiser website. There are FEMA letters that have been uploaded to every single homeowner, and it'll tell you what your valuation is and how much you can spend on repairs after the storm. And so what we got a lot of houses that have been dried out, demo's been done, okay? And now when it comes time to reconstruct, we've got to look at that 50% rule. And if the cost of putting that house back together is going to exceed that 50% valuation, which in sometimes is shockingly low, considering I'm looking at a, $1.5 million house, and, I've only got a $350,000 valuation on the dwelling. It's all over the county right now. If it's going to exceed 50% of the value of the dwelling, then the property has to be brought up to current code, which is devastating for these low-lying single-story dwellings, because current code is an elevated structure. And so some of these homes under the 50% rule are likely to be declared total losses where reconstruction is not possible because of that 50% rule. Okay. And so, you got to get on the property appraiser's website, look at that FEMA 50% rule to see how much you can spend on repairs. Because again, I'm using Pinellas County as the example. Pinellas County is requiring an affidavit to be filed when you apply for any permit right now, post-storm. And included in that affidavit is a summary of all the work to be done. And you've got to allocate the dollar amounts for the different, items of work to be done: drywall, flooring, cabinets, electrical, plumbing, etc. And, it's an affidavit that's being signed by the homeowner and or contractor being submitted to the municipality before reconstruction can start. And this is just going to be a huge, huge issue, because we've got a lot of folks sitting on these properties right now with a big question mark as to whether they're going to be able to rebuild or not, and that's going to be highlighted when it comes time to pull permits. And these municipalities, Pinellas County, for example, have agreements which allow our county to offer flood insurance. So these agreements are with FEMA. We've got these flood management contracts. And so the county doesn't have a lot of autonomy in terms of making these calls. This 50% rule is not negotiable. It's not flexible. It's a harsh reality. So we're going to have to be making some really smart decisions on some of these properties in terms of if it can be rebuilt under the 50% rule, and then if it can, how to do so and how to deal with the county in a way that, is ethical and above board and passes inspections. Because God forbid you spend 6 figures partially putting the house back together and they come out to do one of the final inspections and the building department determines that you've exceeded the 50% rule. Stop work order, and some major ramifications there. So this 50% rule is really a hot topic right now that is, going to have a big impact on our beachfront communities.
Well, can you just give us some examples of how the numbers have come out? I don't know how much a house is worth per square foot if it's a 20-year-old house. How much it costs to store a house right now that had 5 feet of water in it?
Sure. I mean, so, just a quick example. I live in Island Estates, so we're out by Clearwater Beach. And let's say like a single-story house in my neighborhood that was built in, let's say, the 70s or 80s, 2,500, 2,800 square feet. Those houses pre-storm were selling for, let's say, $1.5 million to $1.8 million. Okay. I'm pulling the 50% letters for clients in my neighborhood, and those are coming back. So the building valuation is coming back between, let's say, $325,000 to $450,000. So remember, you only get to spend 50% of that, right? So we're looking at about $150,000, maybe $200,000 that can be spent on reconstruction. Well, if the dryout company removed the flooring, removed 4 foot of base, of drywall, pulled out the kitchen cabinets, pulled out the kitchen countertops, pulled out the bathroom vanities because they were all soaked in salt water and, were likely to grow mold, getting that place put back together under 150,000, 200,000 is potentially going to be a challenge and in a real issue for folks in moving forward.
Is there any chance that they'll update that they'll change the law for this particular hurricane?
I think that's extremely unlikely. I know that, some of our local politicians have been in communication with DeSantis's office and are trying to create that, some sort of momentum there. But, look, this is a national issue. I mean, the tough thing to think about is, we've got a national flood insurance program. That's what NFIP is. That's what these flood policies are, right? And in reality, what we have is a huge segment of the United States population contributing towards flood insurance for a real small segment of the population, right? Because It's a federal program, and our flood insurance premiums are not actuarially sound, okay? So we've got caps on how much our flood insurance goes up every year, and it's basically subsidized by the federal government taxpayers, right? And so this 50% rule, in part, protects the rest of the country, if you will, in terms of what they're subsidizing. And so if we forego the 50% rule, you can go spend $500,000 putting this house back together, which is low lying, it's 5 foot above the base flood elevation. We know it's gonna flood again, and we know you've got all these high-end materials in there, so when it floods again, FEMA's gonna have to pay out again, and that's the rationale behind it. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's fair, but I am saying that politically, nationally, I think it's a very tough issue to deal with. You know, there's more than just a property insurance crisis in the state of Florida as it relates to availability of insurance, you know, fair market rates, et cetera. When it comes to flood, there's a national issue with this. And, you know, we had similar discussions after Superstorm Sandy in 2012, which brought, you know, significant flooding to the, you know, coast in New Jersey and New York, right? You know, and multi-million-dollar houses destroyed up and down the coast. And this was, of course, a big issue then too. But FEMA has been resolute in terms of this 50% rule and substantial damage determinations. And the Florida Building Code for years and years and years has also incorporated a 50% rule. So I just think it's very unlikely, although I can tell you a lot of my neighbors and a lot of our clients would be much relieved for there to be, you know, some sort of relief from this 50% rule. I would love nothing more than to see the county be generous or, you know, conservative in its valuations of the 50% rule. There's just not a lot of autonomy there. And Lee County, after Hurricane Ian, I think was found to be too loosey-goosey with their enforcement of the 50% rule. And they actually, you know, suffered some significant consequences from FEMA as a result of that. And I think Lee County is going to be the example for Pinellas and other counties. You know, they almost lost their ability to offer flood insurance throughout the entire county because of not enforcing the 50% rule as strict as FEMA thought it should have been when they started auditing some of these. So, you know, it's a tough reality, but it's something to, you know, it's something we're all going to have to work through.
Well, and I think part of also along those same lines is that's why flood insurance is written how it is. There are a lot of things that are not covered. And so, yes, you should advocate for yourself, and yes, you should be pushing and, you know, trying to get everything, but we've had to, you know, make sure you're talking to the right people who understand these policies, because we've really had to have some tough conversations with a lot of clients trying to explain what is and isn't covered under flood. And it's very, very, it's very limited. Like additional living expenses has been a really tough one. With flood, most people had, like we just talked about, pulled all the stuff out. They're not residing there, right? They're residing elsewhere. And additional living expenses is usually under your wind policy, but it's not under flood. And so that's not something, if it's due to the flood, you cannot get that covered under that policy. So there's just, it's very, very, you know, this program it exists because it needs to exist. It provides coverage that is needed, but there are definitely a lot of limitations because of what James was just talking about, where we're trying to deal with, you know, certain area and what a big a national program. So just understand when there's things that they're not paying for and stuff, it may actually be what your policy says. So you have to really be able to understand that. And it's a difficult thing. So if you don't know, you should be reaching out to people who can help you understand it.
And then if the house is not inhabitable, the chances are you're going to need major construction issue. And then how long is it going to take to get a permit? You have to get an architect and a engineer to draft up plans nowadays to get a permit to fix most of these houses. How long is that going to take?
Yeah, and a key point that Alison just mentioned, which is, you know, under a homeowner's insurance policy, we've got coverage for additional living expenses, your temporary move out. But if damage to the roof or wind created openings to the building are not what caused those move out expenses, if you moved out because of flood, that's not covered under your homeowner's insurance. And so, you know, we've got, you know, really a harsh reality. I mean, I know I've got, you know, a dozen friends in my neighborhood that were displaced because of the hurricane. They're renting houses for $5,000 or $7,000 a month, and it's not reimbursable under the flood insurance. And there's no argument that that they moved out because of wind created openings, right? Even if the roof's leaking, the reason they moved out was because of the flood. So that's one of those kind of pretty clear cut, it's not covered issues. And so, working through this and the claims process as quick as possible puts the homeowner, the policyholder, in the best position to be moving in as quick as possible. Because, to your point, Alan, is, we get this dried out, we get bids for reconstruction, contractors are all going to be backed up, supplies are going to be in short demand, permitting we're realizing is a challenge as it relates to the 50% rule and otherwise. And the longer this stuff drags on, the longer I'm displaced, living in a rental house, incurring these expenses that I'll never recoup, to the tune of, potentially thousands of dollars a month, and then, unfortunately, a lot of folks are paying a mortgage at the same time. So, these are all challenges, but I think that also kind of goes back to the need for advocacy, whether you're advocating for yourself or you've got a professional advocating for you. You need the claim to be at the top of the pile. You need to be the thorn in the side for the insurance company that's saying, ooh, I really need to look at that Gassman file. He's called 3 times today. I need to look at Gassman, even though I've got 40 other files on my desk as the desk adjuster, because you want your file to be the one that they're looking at. You want your file to be the one that they're paying attention to, and hopefully resolving in a timely manner, because you're just potentially displaced. And we've got this, lengthy process ahead towards reconstruction. And so I think advocacy on the front end helps with a more timely disposition on the back end. What we've experienced, I would say, over the last couple of years. Let's use Hurricane Ian as an example. Allison and I handled over 700 cases from Hurricane Ian in the year that followed Hurricane Ian. I would say about 80 to 85% of those claims resolved without litigation. Okay, so we're a law firm. Folks are hiring us to file a lawsuit. Often, the vast majority, overwhelming majority of those Hurricane Ian cases, we were able to resolve without the need for a lawsuit or litigation. But there was absolutely advocacy along the way, and I think that's an important part of the process, is having some advocate helping to push these claims along so that they do get done in a timely manner.
Okay, so we've got about 3 minutes left. Do you want to mention something you haven't gotten to, or do you want to tell them a little bit about SBA and other FEMA benefits? And by the way, before I forget, we're going to transmit in 2 or 3 hours a copy of this video to everybody who's on, and also everybody who's signed up to be on. And you can watch the video again, you can forward it to people, and try to help people out. I'll share the screen again, because you've got the email addresses for James and Allison there, and you've got my email address. And if you ask me what time it is, I could probably answer that email, but anything more technical, I'm forwarding to them. Yeah, again, a couple minutes left, or if you want to go a couple minutes over. Anything occur to you?
Alison, I'll let you go first, and then just a couple of thoughts.
So I guess my thoughts are, I think we've kind of talked through as much as we can, but even along the lines we've been talking about trying to advocate for yourselves, also, we had a lot of storms, right? Like, this was 2 hurricanes back to back. And so it's very difficult. We had adjusters scheduled to go out for Helene that had to cancel and then reschedule after Milton. And so to try to figure out what's what and who's here and where's this, and I mean, it is a lot. And so I feel like I'm every day trying to talk people through, like, breathe, it's okay, like, we're going to work through this together. But I feel like people they don't know where to turn. And we were like this, I don't know how to explain, like, what the last few weeks have been like for everybody. It's just been a lot. And so I think, just people are here for you to help you, however it is, whether you're looking at yourself or you're contacting us or you're contacting a public adjuster, like, just take a moment. It's a lot. You've got, just look around, say, my family's safe, my family's okay, property is property. That's what's number one, is that if you're, take care of yourself, and then, people are around to help you. There's good contractors, there's good everything out there. So just, it's going to be okay. I think it's a lot of doom and gloom, but it's really not. At the end of the day, property will get fixed, property will get replaced, in whatever means. But as long as you and your family are safe, that's the number one.
Yeah, I think those are great words of advice. I look at the deadlines for submitting a flood claim, and I'm thinking about those timeframes. And under a flood policy, we've got 60 days to submit a proof of loss. Okay, so that's our claims package. A proof of loss is, when I've got an estimate and I'm telling the insurance company, this is how much I think you owe me, that's what we put together in what's called a proof of loss form, okay? And failure to provide a proof of loss within the specified time frame can be a forfeiture of coverage. Now, FEMA has extended, because of this storm, the proof of loss deadline to 120 days, which is 4 months, all right? But you've got to keep in mind that these same FEMA adjusters that are coming out are saying it might be another 2 months before I have my report. So my encouragement is to spend time now getting together these estimates for reconstruction and invoices, because it will be a relatively tight window unless FEMA extends it again. If you're not getting a letter from FEMA for another 30 or 45 days from now saying what they're paying, and you've got a deadline of 120 days as your proof of loss, you know, if you're bringing an advocate on after getting that letter, we've really only got about 30 or 45 days to put a whole claims package together and get that submitted to FEMA to comply with their timeframes. Maybe they'll extend it again, but if they don't, which is already extended it once, if they don't extend it, but you know, and they wait until month 2 or 3 to send you their paperwork, it's a real time crunch. So it's important to know those deadlines, because if you're saying, well, I'm gonna go it alone right now, I'm gonna see what FEMA does, and then I'll reach out to somebody if I don't get paid, do it right away as soon as you get that letter, because if you wait and we blow the proof of loss time frame, it could be problematic. In fact, it'd be detrimental to the claim. So there's some really tight time frames there. Historically, FEMA's extended them, but right now we're operating under 120-day time frame. So I think that's important. The other thing I would just say is, you know, our law firm has a general inbox. It's contact@constable-law.com. And I've had folks sending, you know, their declaration pages to that contact, you know, with questions or descriptions of damages. You're welcome to do that if you've got questions, you know, specific about a policy, or you're not sure if something's covered or not covered. We'd be happy to work through that. You don't have to engage us, just to, you know, fire off a couple of questions. You know, if you've got a question, send it to contact@constable-law, put your question in there. We've got a great team that's all working to try to help support our community, help answer questions as best we can. If you end up a law firm client, great. If not, that's 100% fine too. What we're trying to do is help our community, help folks out, help spread the word in terms of what's covered and what's not, so that we can have answers to some of these questions that are lingering for so many people in our community.
Last question we have here is where can you find the FEMA 50% letter? Is it on the website somewhere, or you have to wait for the mail?
No, that's a great question. So you don't have to wait for it to come to the mail, okay? If you're in Pinellas County, you go to the Pinellas County Property Appraiser website, and you're gonna search for your address. And you can either search by address or you can search by owner name. When you click on that, you're gonna see your property card. It's got either your name or your address. You click on that, and then on the right-hand side, you're gonna see a tool. And under that toolbar, there's a spot for FEMA letter. Click on that FEMA letter, and that's what you're looking for. And that's gonna include the calculation. Pinellas County's issued that for everybody in the county, which I see as the county putting everybody on notice. Hey, here's what your determination is. They've been proactive about it instead of waiting until you apply for permits. But that's how you can find it. If you have a hard time navigating it, or you're in a different county and it's not as readily available, again, we'd be happy to take a quick look. It'll take me all of 30 seconds to, you know, hop on there and find it for you. I'd be happy to email it to you, or somebody on our team can pull that letter and send it to you if somebody's having a hard time finding it.
Okay, super. All right, well, thanks to both of you. Thanks also, we have a lot of lawyers here on this webinar, so thanks to all of you for helping, as James said, our community, a lot of people in need for sure. We'll be calling on you to do more of these, so watch out. Thank you so much for working tirelessly for everybody. Appreciate it very much.
And we love what we do. We love our community, and you know, we're hoping that this is a helpful you know, dialogue. So, and thanks for having us on.
All right. Have a great day. Take care, everybody.